so today we are looking at Ronald Reagan, our 40th president. First of all, look at the election results in 1980. Remember, he said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" The average American looked at the results between over the last 4 years with who was president before Reagan?
Carter.
Right, Jimmy Carter, and said, no, we're not better off than we were 4 years ago with the Iranian hostage situation, stagflation, Russia attacks Afghanistan. It seems we've lost our spot on the world stage, and you can see Reagan wins and wins big in 1980. So we're going to look at two things with Reagan in terms of his domestic issues and his foreign. So first, with the domestic side of the aisle, we were talking that the economy was not doing well. Matter of fact, the economy is, at this point in 1981 into 82, it's the worst it's ever been since the Great Depression. You're looking at 12% unemployment. Scary thought, like right now it's actually worse than that with the coronavirus. But at that time, right, and remember we had high inflation, high unemployment with stagflation. So Reagan's got to come up with a solution to try to get people working again without damaging or destroying the economy. So he comes up with his concept, which we today call Reaganomics, something DOO economics. Reaganomics. Reagan looked at a strategy or a research and understanding of the tax code. And he looks at this chart here, and he's saying that no matter what the tax code is, whether it's at 90%, meaning that for every dollar that you make, 90 cents the government takes, or 35, 40%, that the revenue remains the same. How is that possible? That the more money you make, that it doesn't matter whether it's a lot of money or a little money, that the percentage doesn't matter. The reason why is that if I am working and the government is taking 90 cents of my dollar, well then why am I going to put on that addition? Why am I going to expand my business? It's not worth it to me if the government's going to take so much. But if I cut the taxes and now the government's only going to take 40%, yeah, well, 60% of that then comes back to me. Maybe it's worth it for me. So the idea of Reaganomics is that if we dramatically cut people's taxes, that it's going to be like a defibrillator. Ba-boom! A defibrillator, right? The country is having a heart attack right now. It's on life support. We need to do something to wake it up. Ba-boom! And that's what we want to do. And that's what happens. He wakes up the economy by doing these massive tax cuts. And you can see from that 70% down to about 40% is what he's going to do. 35 to 40 depending on the year. So massive tax cut. Does it work?
Yes.
Yes! And maybe not. But yes, it does work in terms of its idea of getting people back to work. You can see here's the high point of unemployment, 1982 at that 12%, and then boom, it drops and continues to drop down to about 5%. So it worked in getting the people working again, getting people back to work again. So Reaganomics is successful in getting people back to work again. It is successful in the fact that we don't have that inflation worry that Carter was worried about, that the country was worried about. Stagflation is gone. Where people struggle with Reaganomics is the other graph that's here. He said that we're going to bring in more revenue, or revenue would remain the same. But what happened during his presidency, deficits tripled. We went from about $900 billion in debt. Here's where Carter is. That's our debt at the time. Mm-hmm. Reagan's went all the way down here. And then you got H.W. Bush, you have George W. Bush, you have Obama here, and now with coronavirus, we're going to be in big trouble. But the problem is that Reagan was spending a lot of money on the defense, and we're going to look at that as our next shift. So while Reaganomics is successful as a temporary solution, there is always a worry, is it a long-term solution, or does it add to deficits? Does it help the wealthy but not necessarily the poor? Long term, there's a big debate on whether Reaganomics is a big success. but there's no doubt in the short term it did exactly what it needed to do. Boom, boom! And wakes up the economy, wakes up people's confidence again, as Carter was trying to do. All right, so one other piece before we get into the foreign policy, just a little highlight that we also see Reagan with women's rights. He appoints the first female onto the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. So, the history of the Supreme Court since the Constitution, since 1787, we finally have a female on the Supreme Court in 1981. So Reagan is the first to do that. We see the first woman in space with Sally Ride, happens in the 80s. So you're starting to see what we call the glass ceiling break, where women are finally getting to reach the pinnacle of their careers, being able to get the highest position. So it's nice to see. And again, this has nothing to do with Reagan, but we first also had our first female vice presidential candidate in Geraldine Ferrara running on the Democratic side. And Vice President Biden has said that he will have a female candidate in this next election. So we'll see that again probably. All right, so let's get to the last story of Ronald Reagan, and that is the foreign policy. And he is going to go back to the days of massive retaliation. He is a fan of the movie Star Wars. So he does not believe that we should be sitting down and negotiating with bad people. He calls them the evil empire from Star Wars. He's basically calling out Russia, saying that they are like Darth Vader. He says détente is for sissies. We don't sit down and talk and chat. No, you tell them what's up, and he starts building up his military. That peace through strength, that speak softly and carry a big stick philosophy that we've been looking at from the beginning of the year. Here's Rocky versus Drago, Rocky IV. That concept is the return of it. The fear, the worry, is of course that we could go back to the possibility of nuclear war. As we were walking away from that with Nixon, we're now kind of going back to that. And I was a kid, we had talked more about this fear of being attacked from it with a nuclear weapon again. So there was that fear again. But he has a strategy. He tells people, I want us to win the Cold War. You want to know how we win?
Yeah.
We win, they lose. That's the plan. That's a good plan. We win, they lose. Huh? This is smart. How is he going to win? He recognizes that communism cannot compete with capitalism in terms of an economic strategy. With us, with capitalism, you have multiple companies compete. Think of Amazon, for example. Multiple companies compete, and the cheapest or the best quality wins out. And we find ways of cutting costs to bring a product that's cheaper, more efficient, etc. That's capitalism. In communism, the government owns the company, so the government runs it, and there's no incentive to make more money. So it's not going to be as efficient. It's not going to run as well, and ultimately they'll run over budget and fall apart. So that's the difference, and he comes up with a strategy to win the war. He calls it the Strategic Defense Initiative, known as SDI. The press quickly nicknames it Star Wars. And this Star Wars idea is that we're going to build a laser up in space. And with this laser, we're going to shoot down any nukes that come at us. You want to see a little demonstration of this? It's pretty cool. Here's what he's imagining. Hold on 1 second here. He is looking at it from, this is what it's going to look like. So, we're going to build these lasers into space. Oh no, here comes the nukes. Bam! Ha ha! We're going to shoot them down. Right? How sweet is that?
I love that ominous music.
Yes. Oh no, here comes some nukes. We know where they are. We're going to build our lasers into space, and we're going to shoot them down.
Zing!
Yeah, zing! Right? Pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. So that gives you an idea of what what he wants to do. Now, the new leader of the Soviet Union at the time is a guy by the name of, excuse me, Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev says, don't do this. Don't do this. Because you know what's going to happen. You're going to build this laser, and then we're going to build our version of a laser, and then you're going to build something that shoots down our laser, then we're going to build something that shoots down your laser, then you're going to build something that shoots down our thing that shoots down the laser, then we're going to, right? Like, we're going to be spending our way out of this. Like, we don't have the resources. Let's spend our money on things that are necessary, that are things that are good for humanity. And that's when Reagan says, I got him. Reagan then recognizes right away that Gorbachev is already running scared. Gorbachev is saying something like, oh, no, let's not do this. Instead of, think of the past, like a Khrushchev who's taking his shoe off saying, we will bury you, right? Being all tough. Like Gorbachev showing a sign of weakness. And Reagan recognizes that. And Reagan is now going to push him like, no, I'll negotiate. We can talk about reducing nukes, but I'm building this thing. And he stayed with it. And it really is going to be the economic reasoning for this Soviet Union falling apart. But it's not the full story of the Soviet Union falling apart. You have Gorbachev is a reformer in the Soviet Union, and he introduces two ideas out there in Russia that's starting to give the Russian people a taste of freedom. He provides glasnost, or openness. He allows people to practice their religion freely for the first time. He allows newspapers to print freedom of the press, whatever they want, for the first time in 70-some years. Russia is starting to get a taste of freedom. Now, they're hesitant with it. They don't necessarily trust that they can say what they want and print what they want, but the idea is there. He's going to start restructuring, that's perestroika, restructuring the Russian economy, where he's going to allow capitalism into these, or global stores into Russia for the first time. So Coca-Cola can now sell in Russia. McDonald's, the first McDonald's opens in Moscow in 1985. I'm loving it. So the capitalism pieces are starting to show up in Moscow. So there are some people who say, and I think my belief is it's both, is that Reagan is the source or the external force making Russia spend, trying to keep up with the United States. Meanwhile, Gorbachev gives people a taste of these freedoms, a taste of capitalism, a taste of being able to say and do what you want, a taste of practicing the religion as you see freely. And they want more. And they're starting to push. And with Gorbachev not having the military to keep people controlled, that's when this whole thing is going to fall apart. So the last thing under Reagan's presidency, we'll see Reagan go in 1987 to Berlin to give his famous speech here. He's in Berlin talking to Mikhail Gorbachev. You can see a big crowd here, and he's going to tell Mr. Gorbachev the very important thing.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Right, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall is his big famous line, and he, a lot of his advisors are like, oh, don't say that, you may upset them, you know, like, let's be nice, let's try to, no, I'm telling them like it is, this wall is wrong, this wall is keeping people away from freedom, away from liberty. Gorbachev knows it, you need to tear this wall down. And right after Reagan's presidency in 1989, the Russians will pull their troops away from East Germany, and that taste of freedom will happen where the East Germans start breaking the wall down and East and West reunite in 1989. So the Cold War ends after Reagan's presidency. There are people who love Ronald Reagan to the point of they call him like Saint Reagan, that want to give him like every piece of credit to it. I do think he deserves some, because he's the one who's pushing it from the outside, as Gorbachev is giving them a taste of those freedoms on the inside as well. All right, so that's it for today with Ronald Reagan. So I hope everybody enjoyed it, and talk to you soon.